Hunter, we're back. This is the new SEC podcast. Listeners, watchers, we are so excited to talk about 5 days of football. We've waited anxiously all offseason for this, and week one did not disappoint. This is the new SEC podcast. I'm Randall Ledet Jr.
I'm Hunter Ziesman.
And week one was great. We started off Thursday getting able to see Arkansas, or being able to see Arkansas, Missouri, Friday, Oklahoma, and Saturday was the rest of the conference. And, the SEC kicked it off with Georgia, Clemson, Vanderbilt at noon, and it didn't stop.
No, man, and it didn't stop all weekend. And even before then, we had College Game Day down in College Station, and that was phenomenal to see all the fans out there, win or lose. And just being able to kick back and watch football all day. We got to see some new coaching, some new players, some new teams in the SEC, right? So it really did feel like a new season and a new SEC, and it's fun to see and fun to build the excitement around it. And I just can't wait to see where we go from here. It's looking like it's going to be a great season.
It's looking like it's going to be a great season, and to your point, so many new things, right? Like Nick Saban on College Game Day. Like, not only did he retire, he's working one of the biggest programs in college football on the biggest network in college sports with ESPN. And it was just a giant SEC party. Like you said, you start off at College Station. You got Nick Saban on there. You got Pat McAfee doing Pat McAfee things, which I love. And the games themselves, the main part of the party, did not disappoint either. And so we're excited to talk about it. For today's episode 3, we're going to talk about some of the key games that we watched and just some of our thoughts. So you'll be pleasantly surprised and excited to see some of the headlines we picked out. And then we'll give you a kind of a preview for the following week in our next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big games going into this week, we had a couple circled, and one that we, maybe didn't put at the top of our list, still thought about, but it was the one that was the most exciting, and that's Virginia Tech and Vanderbilt.
Yeah, Virginia Tech and Vanderbilt. I've kind of spent some time trying to figure out a nickname for Diego Pavia, quarterback. Is it Pavia Power or Dynamite Diego? And I think I landed on Dynamite Diego, and he was explosive. 2 touchdowns in the air, 1 touchdown on the ground. I think he had over 150 passing yards, 100 or 200 passing yards, 100 rushing yards. And Vanderbilt came out with this new energy, this new swag. I don't know if it's a new logo or the lack of the finished football field, but they took a lead early in the game, and I couldn't help but continue to flip back to that channel compared to the Clemson-Georgia game.
Yeah, no, it's the one that kind of took the spotlight for me, where I flipped right back to it, and you mentioned it. 200 in the air, 100 on the ground. He had the most rushing yards from a Power 4 quarterback in week 1, and they really took this former New Mexico State offense and built an offense around him that capitalizes on his strengths and this decision-making, athleticism. And Virginia Tech was kind of lost out there, not knowing who to follow on the field, where the ball is going to go. And it got them out to that lead early, 17-0. And they're going to be able to shake up the SEC if, they can continue that progress. But love to see it from Dynamite Diego.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting stat, right? Because we saw some amazing quarterback performances with Jackson Dart at Ole Miss and some of these other games. I mean, Cam Ward was electric, of course, against Florida, which we'll get to later. But Diego Pavia, for his first Power 4 start, going to Vanderbilt and playing that way. Vanderbilt showed me a lot on defense. Langston Patterson was one of their leading returning linebackers. He had a great game, and when their backs were against the wall and Virginia Tech was coming back, they tied the game up. They tied it again at 27-27, and they had an opportunity to win in the 4th. They missed the kick. It felt like you were waiting for the air to pop out underneath Vanderbilt, if their metaphorical tire. Maybe Bridgestone's headquartered in Nashville. But they kept it going, right? It was like they scored a touchdown in overtime, which to me is an exclamation point of this was our game. And it was their game. Like they clearly earned it. It wasn't gimmicky. And it should give, fans in Nashville something to be excited about, because you come out, it's not like you're playing like, Tennessee State or Alabama A&M. You're playing a legit team that's supposed to win the ACC or has a good shot. And they took it to them physically. They took it to them on the ground. And, there's just a lot to be excited about with that schedule. I think you were talking about that before with me, Hunter.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of things to be excited about, and it's not only the offense, right? Like the defense and the game planning going into this game was phenomenal. We were ready to see, Kyron Drones, the dual threat quarterback, running over 4 yards per carry last year. Vanderbilt held him to only 1.2 per carry. They really bottled him up, had him looking shaky, a little bit rigid behind the line. So that game planning was phenomenal from the defense, and then they were flying all over the field. You mentioned Langston Patterson, Brian Longwell, those two guys flying all over the field, 19 tackles between the two. So, when you look ahead, you have explosiveness on offense. You have guys who can make plays and bottle up, bottle up plays on defense. So as we look to the rest of the schedule, they have teams that in the SEC that they can beat. They're going to start out probably 3-0 now with Alcorn State and Georgia State, but they do have South Carolina. They do have Kentucky. They play LSU. There's a lot of teams that they could surprise.
Yeah, definitely a lot of teams that can surprise. And you mentioned the favorable start when it comes to the season, and now you're starting to look at some of these games and wonder, can Vanderbilt give them a game? Because I always thought their main drawbacks was the defense. They made a good amount of additions on that end, and the offense. I mean, they lost a lot. Like, there's a lot of guys that we'll talk about in this week one recap who played for Vanderbilt, so the talent was there. It's just when you're resetting your whole roster, it changes the culture, and so a lot to be excited about. I had a blast watching it. I was okay with my pick being blown up there because it means it's another SEC team winning. So love to see it.
That's right. Yeah. And anytime an SEC team wins, even better when you get it over a Power Four conference opponent in the ACC there. They weren't the only team that played an ACC opponent. If we look down in Atlanta, the Georgia Bulldogs were doing their thing and really took it to Clemson, and it was a bit of a blowout, right?
Yeah, it was a bit of a blowout. Early on, it looked pretty close. I think that the headline for Clemson coming into this was, do we see some improvement from Cade Klubnik? Do we, see improvement from that season with 19 touchdowns and 9 picks? Can Phil Maffa handle the full majority of the workload at running back after losing Will Shipley? And for Georgia, the main headline was, is this run defense improved from last year? For Georgia, it's like they're a Mercedes. Everything is smooth. You're trying to find little ways to improve, and they did that, right? The defense was very stout. They only gave up, I think, about 7 points in the game or 10 points in the game. Offensively, Carson Beck looked very efficient, even without Trevor Etienne at running back. Nate Frazier stepped in and looked very effective at RBU. So a lot to look forward to positively, and Kirby Smart can check off on his list that this is trip number 1 of hopefully 3 to Atlanta. That should result in wins for him if they want to reach their goal of a national championship.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the team plays like they did, especially in that second half and beyond for the rest of the season, you can't bet against the Bulldogs because you know what they can do. And, we looked at the weapons from last year that departed, but when they built and reloaded a team around Carson Beck, and they brought in, like, you talked about Vandy transfers. They had London Humphreys come in, played great. Colby Young up from Miami. Arian Smith was able to kind of get his footing in Georgia for his 5th season there. Dominic Lovett, like, really all weapons were firing. They got everybody involved, ETN there or not. Nate Frazier had a great game. So I think what we're expecting from Carson Beck this season, he performed. Primetime accuracy, great ball placement. The defense bottled up everything, and Cade Klubnik looked a little bit lost out there at times. At where do I go? What do I do? And that's the Georgia team we've come to expect. So, their defense was great. Clemson's offense was bad, and the combination of the two was a pretty tough day for the Tigers in Atlanta.
Yeah, definitely a tough day for the Tigers in Atlanta. And I always say that you should put a little bit of stake in these out of conference early season games, because sometimes you just don't know where these teams will finish at the end of the season ranked. But I mean, Dabo's had 9-win seasons for about the past 10 years, so that's going to be a good Clemson team. They may compete for the ACC. They're still in ACC contention. They took a SEC out of conference loss, so it's only upside, right? You look at that game, you dominated Clemson, so you should feel good about that. If they are a playoff contender, that's a good ranked win, most likely. And if they're not, you didn't play with your food. The Dogs ate, and for the Dogs, it's business as usual. So no surprises there, and definitely got to be feeling good if you're in Athens.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned Clemson and what they have to look forward to this season. And I think that they might have been missing a couple players that they didn't go get in the transfer portal. And we're seeing the importance of that adapting to the new college football. It's not only the new SEC, there's all these changes in football. And Clemson has had a hard time, I think, adapting to that. Whereas Georgia was able to bring in the playmakers, running backs, wide receivers, offense, defense. And that's a Georgia team that is explosive, someone to watch in the SEC as always. Um, we did have the
Yeah.
game. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, I was going to say we did have the game of the week, which as we're talking about all these SEC teams that won, we were excited to see Notre Dame at A&M. College Game Day was there, and it's going to be easy to point out, that Texas A&M lost, but I still think there's things to be excited about there from A&M.
Yeah, and generally I'm pretty optimistic. I understand Texas A&M fans wanting to see more from the team, and I think when you have that much in resources, you have a coach you hired who's very familiar with the staff and with the players, you want to see them take it from where they were last year and go up quickly. And I think you saw a lot of positives, right? I mean, the game was tied in the first half. You're going into the fourth quarter, you're tied. You tied at 13-13. I think the glaring hole was Connor Wegman. I mean, 2 interceptions, they get under 200 yards. Just didn't look as clean this game. But you got to feel good because even when he didn't play his best game, that defense was able to lock down someone like Riley Leonard, who's supposed to be one of the top quarterbacks in the country, and I think is. And then, they kept them in the game. So if they play like that against a team like Notre Dame in the SEC, there's a lot to be optimistic about.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're happy giving a team 23, right around 23 points. Any more, any less, a little less is better. But, Texas A&M did play well. And I think it's, instead of discrediting A&M in any way or dismissing the performance that they had, we do have to give credit to the Notre Dame team and what they were able to do on the field. Some of the big question marks going into the game was the O-line for Notre Dame. Would they be as powerful as they were in seasons past against this Texas A&M edge rush and protecting Riley Leonard? And they played great. They showed what they had. And I think that took a little bit of the air out of Texas A&M not being able to get to the quarterback as much as they would have liked. On the other side, the DBs for Notre Dame played great. Made Connor Wegman a little bit uncomfortable back there and where he could go with the ball. So it may have been a combination of two things, him not looking entirely comfortable there, but it was a tough team in Notre Dame. This is a top 5, top 6 team. So you got to be happy with how you played and looking forward in the schedule. They're going to have opportunities to improve on it. Their linebacker, Tareen York, talked after the game, we have to improve on rush defense. So there's that self-accountability there. They know what they need to do. And now it's just time to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think that those are all great points. Like you said, that self-accountability is something you always want to hear. I think fans were kind of getting a little bit tired of Jimbo Fisher's anemic responses when it comes to losses, and the expectation that they were supposed to just be a bowl team is not a shared expectation in College Station. And so, the Elko era opens up with an L, but it's a close L. I'm not a believer in moral victories, but there's a lot you could take away from that. And I think that, if they can continue to build off the run with Moss and really see more on the offense explosiveness wise, I think it should be good. They got McNeese State next week out of Lake Charles. Game will be played in College Station, so should be an easy FCS Southland matchup for them. So fun nights in College Station.
Yeah.
That crowd was rocking. I mean, Johnny had him going at game day. He had him going that night. Celebrities there, and so that's what we want to see. We want to see that level of energy. And so it's if you're just off of hype alone, it feels that way. I can only imagine once they start winning again.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have, like you said, the McNeese game next week. They're going to have some things to improve on. Fun fact from this game, of the 246 yards that they had, 90 were after contact. So what they're going to need to work on is trying to get guys in space. They have the strength there to break tackles. You love to see that. But what Connor Wegman's going to need to do is find guys in space, O-line holding up, giving your running back, let him get past the line of scrimmage before he has to start breaking those tackles. So I'm sure that's something that they're going to talk about. How do you get guys in space? And I'm excited to see where they go.
Same here. I mean, I might be dating myself here, but A&M fans are looking for that Ryan Swope at receiver, Mike Evans at receiver. And so we'll see who's going to ultimately emerge to help with more yards to contribute to the offense.
Absolutely. And we're looking forward to seeing that. And while those were some of the big games of the week, right? We had plenty of SEC teams that played, out of conference opponents, FCS level, or, group of four, group of five opponents. And there were a ton of those games going on. It was tough to keep track of them all with all the other highlight games, but which one maybe stood out to you the most? What team were you most excited to see in their tune-up week 1 game?
Yeah, I was really excited to see what Kentucky did. They ultimately ended up playing the latest. They had a lightning delay. But what really stood out to me, why I was excited, was to see what Brock Vandagriff could do and what that receiving core could do. And also just the energy they have on the field. Like, these games are an opportunity to come out and just go through the motions, or you can come out with a pop and a bang. And Kentucky, I thought they looked pretty good in a couple quarters. We talked a lot about Barry and Brown, but Dane Key was able to get a touchdown in the game at receiver. Barry and Brown had 2 touchdowns. I liked what I saw when it comes to getting the ball in his hands. He had four carries as well, so you can tell they're trying to just get him in space. And I felt that Brock Vandagriff showed me a good amount, not just in the air, but with his feet. Like, he was able to make plays on the run and kind of extend some plays, and was able to get some good runs as well. So that was just really good to watch. It was refreshing for them, and definitely exciting.
Yeah, no,
How about for you?
I mean, yeah, the Kentucky game was big. I love seeing the receiving core. I love seeing the defense, the pressure that they got on that FSU transfer and Tate Rodemaker. It made him very uncomfortable. Only really had one good drive there, and I wouldn't put too much weight into that if you're a Kentucky fan. They look strong all around. But the game I was most excited to see, which I was looking forward to, was what can Missouri do without Cody Schrader? We know what they can do in the air. We know that connection with Luther Burden. But they got 5.1 yards per carry with Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll back there. So they found some guys who can replace that gap. We know what they can do in the air, like I said. Now we're seeing what they can do on the ground. A little bit of slowing down in the second quarter, but that's not anything to worry about. So I was excited to see that from the Missouri team.
Definitely. And I know Eli Drinkowitz was calling for the game to be a sellout. That was something that was a point of, you could say, concern. And it was a sellout, and you talked about their ground game, but I think, Luther Burden he got 2 touchdowns, does what he does best. And they looked efficient. They looked good. There was no gaps from what I saw. So that was an exciting one. Another one that I was really excited to watch was Texas. This was Texas's debut with the SEC on their chest. And that offense is just gaudy. It was so good. We were able to see it get an Arch Manning appearance, but I really look at receivers like Isaiah Bond, who got a touchdown, Matthew Golden, transfer from University of Houston. It is what it is, but he had 2 touchdowns. He got involved in the punt return game as well, and they looked pretty dangerous. I mean, they had the running game looked pretty solid. Two of the running backs combined for over 100 yards, and Colorado State is not like a pushover. They have a pretty good quarterback, rumored to have been given an offer of $600K from certain schools, and they have I think Torian Hunter at receiver, who is probably going to get picked up in the draft somewhere, and they locked them down. I mean, I think he only had like 4 receptions, so a lot to feel good about watching that game against Colorado State, a group of 5 team, not FCS.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned it, getting everybody involved. They killed it in the transfer portal. They killed it in recruiting. 6 of the 9 receivers there are new to the program, and they showed them why they came there. They got everybody involved. Freshman running back Jarrett Gibson got involved. I'm excited to see this Texas A&M team progress. They have Michigan next week, and we'll talk more on that later. But this is a team where if the offense is clicking, it's going to be very, very tough to stop, because who do you focus on? There's too many guys there. So that was fun to see. Let's shifting over to a team that had offense firing on all cylinders. I'm high on Ole Miss. Jackson Dart, 6 touchdowns in the first half there. Crazy.
Crazy. Jackson Dart looked incredible. And it's almost like people forget that 2 seasons ago, he was in a quarterback competition with Spencer Sanders. Spencer Sanders was a starting quarterback for Oklahoma State, got them to the conference championship, and he transferred to Ole Miss, thinking he can compete for the starting job. And Jackson Dart won it last season, and he just continued to ascend. And it's a great story in the SEC, because you love to see guys that just rise to the moment each year, and Jackson Dart seems to be that guy. They did not play with their food with Furman. 6 touchdowns. Trey Harris was able to get involved. All SEC receiver there for them, and the defense, put up a shutout. So I think that was one of a couple of shutouts in the SEC when it comes to out of conference. So a lot to be excited about there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you always like Lane Kiffin, entertaining coach after the game. He's like, I'm usually critical about something, but there's not anything tonight to be critical about. So when a coach says that, that sends everybody home happy, builds some momentum, the rapport with the guys. But
Yeah,
we talked about Texas.
you might get Sunday and Monday off with those type of responses.
Yeah, do some traveling, watch some NFL games.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So another we talked about Texas, another new entry to the SEC. We got to see Oklahoma's SEC debut on Friday night, and huge credit to Jackson Arnold. But what I was looking at was the Oklahoma defense, and Zach Alley's first game at DC, and 6 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 6 turnovers. I mean, that's a defensive performance if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, that was an amazing defensive performance. I feel like I was at the gym watching the game, and I think like every time I looked up at the screen, Temple was in the punt formation. They just had a really hard time, getting the ball down the field. I don't think they got the first points until the second half. And there's a lot to be excited about. That's what Venable's brand is built on, which is defense. And on the offensive side, I think Jackson Arnold provides like a fresh, energy to the offense. And Dylan Gabriel was a great quarterback. He still is great. But Jackson Arnold kind of provides that new, fresh energy. He's a local Oklahoma guy, so he can get the troops going. And I really was impressed by Deion Burks. This is going to be a stacked year for receivers in the SEC. Yep. And when you hear stacked year, you maybe think, okay, the defenses aren't that good or the DBs aren't that good. I don't think that's the case at all. And we can touch on that with Alabama and one of their DBs who had a great game. But on the offensive side for Oklahoma, I mean, Deion Burks had 3 touchdowns with ease. It looks like he was just in rhythm with Jackson Arnold, and this is going to be a scary team to play. Like I wouldn't want to have to face them on the schedule during the season, and they're going to give some people some scares. I expect these games to be close, and I was very, very impressed with their performance against Temple out of the American Athletic Conference.
Yeah. And you mentioned Deion Burks. There's no positive way to really spin an injury. We hate to see injured players. Jalil Farouk broke his foot in the game. Jaden Gibson out for the season as of a couple weeks ago. But they had Deion Burks show up, show out. You can never replace guys. You never are looking to replace somebody. But when you have someone who can put up the production that Deion Burks did, they feel a little bit more comfortable at the receiver position. If Farouk has to miss, he was going to miss at least 5-6 weeks. So you have that guy there, and it's exciting to see. And they weren't the only offense that had a great performance. We were high on Taylor Green. We talked about him so much, the Arkansas quarterback, last week, and he showed us what he can do. It's a welcome party to him for the SEC for sure.
Yeah, hey, they're probably partying down there in Arkansas because 10 touchdowns, 70-0. That was an amazing performance, and I'm thinking, he won the Mountain West. Everybody on Arkansas, recruiting wise, should be better than Boise State. So you give him better players. You're playing an FCS team in Arkansas Pine Bluff. It should be domination. But I don't think I could have expected 4 or 5 touchdowns, 200 in the air, 2 rushing touchdowns. He was out there looking like a hybrid between Cam Newton and Johnny Manziel with just some of these cuts in the open space, just to the end zone. And it was just a really impressive performance. It gives you something excited to look forward to. And then transfer running back Nate Johnson as well, was involved in the party. He was able to get into the end zone a couple times there. And so it's fun, right? 13 wins for the SEC, but for Arkansas, they need that. It gives us a lot more excitement going into Oklahoma State for this week as well.
Yeah, no, they needed to work on a couple things, and they did just that. We saw the comfortability of Taylor Green at quarterback. He looked like it was his position. He came out there. You got to see that they gave him the opportunity to make some plays and have that confidence in him. So I expect him to carry that into Oklahoma State and, use it as that confidence booster. When we're looking at quarterbacks, Nico Iamaleava, I'm gonna get it right. Showed out the real deal, and if he can keep up that playmaking that he had against Chattanooga, we are going to see potentially a beatdown in Charlotte against NC State. So I was happy to see that from Nico.
Yeah, no, definitely happy to see that. I think on the NC State Tennessee front, you look at NC State obviously struggled with Western Carolina, and you look at Tennessee. It was never a game, and no one thought it was gonna be a game, but it was like 45-0 at halftime.
Yeah.
They came out in those clean, smoky grays. I personally would have preferred to see the traditional orange. Call me crazy, but the
Yeah.
grades were clean though. They're really nice, and I mean Nico just looked efficient. I think I looked up at the scoreboard at one point or the stats, and he was like 19 for 21. So he plays very efficient. He runs when he needs to run. He's got a very accurate arm, and all these tune-up games, the SEC oil change. It's going to be more skill players on the SEC side, but what I'm looking for is how they look on their drives, and Tennessee did not score on many drives, and so it was a really impressive performance for the team overall.
Yeah, no, Nico was the highlight there. Got to call attention to Dylan Sampson. 3 touchdowns, 10 yards per carry out of the backfield. Love to see it. Will that explosiveness stay for tougher teams than Chattanooga? We'll see. But if you got a guy doing that, and in week 1, you have a pretty dynamic duo there. Behind the O-line. So excited to see. I think, only a couple more really to highlight from this category of teams that played, inferior opponents. We weren't super high on Mississippi State going into this season, but they were better than expected. Blake Shapen played a great game, dual threat. What do you think there from game 1 for Jeff Lebby?
Yeah, the Jeff Lebby era started off with a good start. Quite a choice to schedule a team that has the same colors as you. At some points, I felt like I was watching like a scrimmage, and that's not anything against Eastern Kentucky. It was just they're wearing the opposite colors. But optics aside, Blake Shapen looks really good. He was a former starter from Baylor a couple years ago, but transferred from Baylor this past season. 247 yards in the air, a couple tutties, and the offense was humming. It looked really solid. That has never really been an issue for Mississippi State, but it's always good to at least continue to build upon what you already have. The Zach Arnett era may haunt some people, and this is nothing against Zach, but so far I really was very impressed with Jeff Lebby and the team, and they definitely took care of business against Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah. No, they took care of business. Auburn took care of business and showed us some flashy plays against Alabama A&M, and got to highlight that. I mean, there's pros and cons to playing a team like this. You do get to put on a show for your fans, get them excited about the season, but you want to make sure you're working on stuff. Auburn went out and you got to see Peyton Thorne's RPO decision making on full display. And he picked up a lot of those passes, or a lot of those RPOs, and threw the ball. We saw 60% passing on 46 plays. So we know he can do it. I'm excited to see when they have to rush a little bit more, see what that attack looks like. But that was an Auburn team that was a little bit flashy week 1.
Yeah, no, very, very flashy week 1. And I guess, it's kind of a balance between you want to test things out, but you don't want to show too much on your film when it comes to playing the next opponent. So trick plays, maybe you want to use them, but you don't want to use too many of them. You want to save them for in conference and tougher out of conference teams. But he had 5 touchdowns, which tied his career high in touchdowns, both in the air and on the ground. So that was dating back to last year against Arkansas in a 48-10 win. But like I said, I really liked his efficiency when it comes to in the air. We always love to see 3 touchdowns in the air. We got all receivers involved, including Cam Coleman, flashy freshman 5-star. I think his name and Ryan Williams will be mentioned together synonymously for a while when it comes to the next 3 years or however long they're in college. But great performance. They put up 73 points, which I think was the most out of all of the SEC teams, and for week 1. And you got to feel good about it. At most points, probably the worst opponent, but still a Division I school. I mean, Alabama A&M can hold their own in the SWAC as well. So
yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Ryan Williams, so that's probably the last one here to talk about of these type of games. And Ryan Williams, 2 touchdowns in his debut at Alabama, only 17 years old, and wasn't only his debut, it was Kalen DeBoer's debut, and we got to see what he can do from a coaching standpoint. Not only him, we got to see Kane Womack turn up the defense. I think we're getting back to a defense that Alabama fans can look at and say, oh, this feels like 5-6 years ago when we were just, getting takeaways, swarming the ball, hard hitting, linebacker play. And it was fun. It was a fun game to see. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a fan.
No, yeah, it was a really fun game to see. I liked it as a night game. I feel like that's optically great on the eyes. And I like the matchup. Western Kentucky's a really respectable team from the Conference USA. They have a good history. They've probably made bowl games at least 5 of the last 7 years. Taking the focus away from Western Kentucky, I was definitely impressed with the run game with Justice Haynes. I mean, there's a couple big breakout runs Love to see that. The defense didn't play around with their food. And all the things that I've read from some of the Alabama forums, I mean, I'm deep in it. They're excited, and I know the standard's pretty high there, justifiably so. But I'm really happy to see how they're rallying around Kalen DeBoer and in that performance. You had pointed out some things that could probably be a little bit tighter on offense, and you have a much tighter lens on that. So I'd love to kind of hear more what your thoughts were there.
Yeah, and I think it maybe is both sides of the ball. We saw Kane Womack's post-game conference where he has he's bringing back that Alabama standard of never satisfied. A shutout 63-0, and he's still looking at ways the defense could have improved. TJ Finley was able to take some of those, routes that broke across the middle. Some of the linebackers were focused on rush, safety support, maybe didn't come down. But I think we'll see that the zones get a little bit more tuned up. I think from offense, I would have liked to see Milroe do a little bit more of that intermediate passing, string a drive together. He is a big play guy, both on the ground, both in the air. He led, one of the highest yards per air attempt last year, and I was hoping to maybe see him dial it back, make a couple plays, make the defense think. Take what you're given. So if there are guys wide open, go for it. But I'm hoping next week against USF, we'll get to see him string together a drive a little bit more indicative of what DeBoer was able to do with Penix last year at Washington. So I'm by no means dissatisfied, but I am I'm excited to see where we can go and continue to build on it. It's only game one for this for the team under this coaching staff.
Definitely. And I know we were texting and talking about it. I mean, we love the SEC, kind of like a tune-up, SEC oil change tune-up power rankings. And I think I put Alabama at about 3 or 4 behind Missouri, behind Ole Miss, and maybe behind Arkansas. And again, that's based upon the standard that they have set, right? They've set this Lamborghini, Mercedes-Benz type standard. And I think they definitely met it at a pretty close level. But there was some opportunities for improvement. And, when you're so much more athletic than your opponent, you're going to take more deep shots. And I feel like because the offense is so explosive, they're taking these deep shots. There wasn't really as much of a need for the short game, but you're going to need that when it comes to conference play. And so these type of games, you want to see just those types of drives to feel good that, okay, we have a good play set to convert on 3rd and 5 if we're in that position, or if we have a set where we can get 6 yards on a hitch or 6 yards on a post, and just kind of wear down the defense on the offensive side. So we hoping to see that here in the next coming weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some teams that are playing a second tune-up game. Some teams that had a tougher game week 1 are going to have a tune-up. So we're going to continue to talk about teams that are developing themselves through these type of matchups. But not everybody got to go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and I know you had mentioned it earlier. We've focused on so many of these positive games and the tune-up games. There's one last team that was able to win, but it didn't really look that good, and that was South Carolina versus Old Dominion. Old Dominion is a Sun Belt team, so some might think they're FCS. They are in the Sun Belt. The Fun Belt, some call it. I call it SEC Junior. All the teams are in the South, and they kind of have similar fan bases with Texas State and Georgia Southern and Georgia State. But the Fun Belt is a competitive conference, and Old Dominion is a pretty competitive team. And South Carolina had a lot of new things happening with Lenore Sellers at quarterback. New running back with Raheem Sanders. So I was impressed with his performance, over 100 yards. I think he had 1 touchdown in the ground, but it just felt like the offense just couldn't get things going. They scored 2 times, but it was off of fumble recoveries in their own red zone. So they were kind of propped up to score ideally, but a win's a win.
Yeah, a win's a win. And it is, you got to look at all of it all around, what caused this to happen. And Sellers was getting pressure on him nonstop. I think the O-line play needs to step up a little bit for South Carolina. 4 sacks, only 3.6 yards per carry behind that O-line. They're going to figure out the things that are working. Sellers is going to get a little bit more comfortable in the face of pressure. 43% passing last week, and you combine all that, you still get the win. So there's nothing to be upset about. It's things to look at and build upon. You mentioned it. Raheem Sanders played great. There's bright spots there, and when Sellers was connecting, he was connecting. I know that sounds simple to say, but I think that we see them start to maybe find stride. They don't have a tough game next week against Kentucky, but it will be an interconference game where they can maybe improve upon some of the the things that they picked up as feedback from the last game. I think O-line play being the biggest one.
Yeah, and look, some fans in Lexington might argue with you that this game's not tough, but it's on paper not as strong as an Alabama or a Tennessee, but should be more evenly matched when it comes to starting SEC play. Love to see that game flex into that 3:30 slot on ESPN for prime time, and that was kind of the SEC oil change tune-up. All these teams won. There were 4 shutouts. Multiple teams I think went over 40 or 50 points. Like I know they went over 40 to 50 points, and it was all around good showing. A lot of new emerging players showed out. A lot of familiar faces showed out. Ryan Williams, like we talked about it before, newer face, but I mean he looked impressive for a 17-year-old. I'm thinking about what I was doing at 17, and it definitely was not catching passes in the SEC, despite stature. But good. Some good tune-up games, and there's more of those to come for sure.
Yeah, and absolutely some good tune-up games. Not everyone had the luxury of being able to do that. The Florida Gators had a home opener against an in-state rival in ranked Miami, and Miami came in and took care of business. And it's a little bit frustrating as a Florida fan, I'm sure, to see the memes on the internet and everyone talking about firing the coach, Billy Napier. If they were going to fire him, they would have done it in the offseason. He's going to be your guy for a couple more weeks. Don't focus on that. We'll see where they go from here. But what were some of your thoughts coming out of that Miami-Florida game?
Yeah, definitely had a couple thoughts. And you might hear me repeat this for the listeners that have listened or new listeners, but I'm really focused on how Florida looks on the offense and defense and special teams. Special teams was a challenge last year. I know they put like a 11-man spot on the sideline to make sure every player is ready to be on the field. But really what I'm focusing on is how do they look in wins or losses? And they just didn't really look like they were clicking on any side of the ball. The defense didn't look improved at all from last year. The defense at average giving up 35 points a game. Cam Ward was having his way. He scored his first touchdown to I think Cam Warmack. It's his 9th year in college football. But Cam had his way. He was, running rollouts. He was, getting touchdowns in the air. The run game looked good. And so for Florida, you're really looking to hang your hat on Mertz, who he didn't have an awful game, but when you're finding yourself down, 20 plus points in the swamp, and Miami definitely showed up. If we have time, we should add the clip of one of these fans just on a 3-minute rant that he found himself at a Denny's. I mean, it was just not really impressive on the defensive side or the offensive side. And that's where I think the Napier conversations have kind of started to re-fire up, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the skill players on both sides of the ball, I don't think are the focus here. The game was lost in the pressure. Florida not being able to get pressure on Cam Ward, and Miami getting too much pressure on Graham Mertz. He was unable to really build drives because of that. Florida defense had multiple penalties that stopped drives early that they stopped. They stopped Miami, a couple roughing the passer calls that then brought Miami back from that brink. And 3 sacks, 8 tackles from loss coming from 7 different players for Miami. You're not going to win a game when you're not winning that upfront battle in the trenches. What it led to Graham Mertz injury. We'll see if he plays next week, in concussion protocol still. And if not, there could be a positive behind DJ Lagway maybe being your guy. We've seen where teams that don't have a super strong O-line going to a guy who has that dual threatness, a little bit of ability to roll out of the pocket, and it's worked for teams that don't have that strongest O-line. So, next week they do have Samford. Expect to see if DJ Lagway starts, him building that comfortability, building a game plan that they can then take into UCF.
Yeah, you had talked about it on our preview episode. We might see a 2-quarterback system here at Florida, and unfortunately, it could be showing because of the injury to Graham Mertz. DJ Lagway came in. I think he threw like a couple passes. He threw an interception, and I wouldn't put too much stake into that. I mean, it was kind of garbage time, but Samford could be a good tune-up game for them. When I think about Florida and kind of this concern is, you named the defensive line and the offensive line struggled. That is the name of the game in the SEC. The best defensive lineman and the best offensive lineman come from the SEC. Where the SEC wins is in the trenches. When you watch them play ACC teams and a team like TCU versus Georgia, that matchup was lost in the trenches. Like those are Texas boys at TCU, and Georgia's got Texas boys and other guys in the South, but the linemen are stronger. And for Florida, bringing it back to that was where they lost. So you're sitting there, you're a Florida fan, you're like, okay, quarterback play was so-so, we'll give it a C. Running back play was so-so, we'll give it a C+. Offensive line play, D. Defensive line play, D. Overall defense, D. Where are the positives that we can point to say, okay, well, if we're keeping Billy, it's because he's doing this on offense. And it's like, no, not really. Well, he's doing this on defense. It's like, we know it's not that. And so the feelings are justified. And so you kind of hope to, there's a lot of area of opportunities. Where do you start?
Yeah, it's, areas of opportunity is just developing comfortability with each other, watching the film, right? And I think the game score got a little bit out of hand. I never excuse giving up on the field, but it looked like around 24-10 is kind of where the momentum really turned to where players are just kind of ready to get out of the heat on the Florida side of the ball. I think looking forward, you look behind maybe a new quarterback, you look behind maybe Graham Mertz having more time in the pocket. This isn't a bad Miami team. Like, this is a good Miami team. I think at this point now, looking at the way the ACC has played up to this point, they're kind of the strong suit in the ACC and going to be their, golden child to make it to one of the top 4 seeds in the playoffs. But with Florida, right now you're doubted. So you're kind of playing with house money to a degree where it's like anything that you do positive is going to be unexpected and good. You have Mississippi State, or you have Texas A&M and Mississippi State coming up on the schedule. And those are 2 teams that we've seen have their own vulnerabilities. And if you can, watch the film, capitalize on that, and get an SEC win, at some point, there's things to build off of. I think DJ Lagway is going to be that guy for them. And I think we'll see a little bit more play from him. I hope to see some more play from him. And
I mean, a win would be great. I think, coming out and getting a 7-0 lead or a 14-0 lead, just like giving fans something excited to look forward to. Like, if I was putting on a Gator hat right now, going on the bar, I might watch that game at home. But there's still a lot of season left. That's an out of conference loss. Rinse and move on. Rinse and move on. So
anytime you're in an out of conference game, the loss definitely matters, but you're still looking forward to what you can do in SEC play. LSU's kind of in a similar boat. They've been in this boat many times. This is their 5th straight season opener loss. They've seen that you can bounce back from this. But let's look at at LSU versus USC. What do you think about that game there?
Yeah, when I was looking at LSU versus USC, from a USC lens, definitely was not expecting that improvement off of a defense. From an LSU lens, I mean, Garrett Nussmeier looked good. Can LSU miss on quarterbacks? Is it possible? I'm not asking them to, but it doesn't seem like they do, right? Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, and now Nussmeier. He stuck it out, stayed a couple years, earned the starting spot this year as a senior year. He only missed on 9 passes, 30 for 39, 308, 2 touchdowns. He looked really impressive. I think if he continues to play like that, this team is 100% a team that can make the playoffs, which you had in your bracket. On the run game, they were still trying to figure out who's going to be their guy. And John Emery Jr., he looks reminiscent to me as a Cowboys fan, like Marion Barber. I mean, he had that pop when he was running the ball. He had 61 yards and he was sharing carries with other RBs, but and then the defense was much improved. So I'll let you kind of touch on that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you hit it. Nussmeier played great there. He came out of the game and started really carving up the USC defense. And then it felt like for some reason the game was lost in the coaching battle. I don't think it was fair for Brian Kelly to kind of put blame on the quarterback play and saying Miller Moss outplayed our quarterback, because I think what happened here is they lost momentum and they started kind of forcing the run and using this game to figure out their run game. And they should have just stuck to the passing. You have to play balance, but Kyron Lacey came out and was strong, 7 for 94 in the first half, and then dead silent, 2 targets, no catches in the second. So there's always adjustments that happen, but they took their eye off of what was working. I think that there were some questionable coaching calls there, but you got, if you can finish your drives, then this LSU team would have been solid from the jump. 5 red zone trips, only 2 touchdowns to show for it. If they can finish their drives, find their identity offensively, they're going to be fine.
Yeah, I definitely think they're going to be fine. I think hindsight's 2020, so you probably regret not going for the field goal at the beginning of the game when you're taking it to the USC defense. You're watching that first drive and you're like, oh, this is the same USC defense of old, and that wasn't the case. I mean, they were making some really key stops. USC had the benefit of coming into this game as a 23 next to their name. I think it's a byproduct of being USC and their brand. Like, give them a number. They recruit well. Miller Moss looks okay, but this is based upon week one. I don't think this is a number 23 team in the country. Like, I think their projections have probably gone up for their win loss significantly, and people are starting to look at their games like Michigan, like, oh, okay, like this offense showed us a lot more than Michigan last week. So nothing to hang your hat on there. Like, that's a good opponent. On the LSU side, I think, like you said, get Kyron Lacy more involved in the second half. He is someone you can certainly build off of. He's looking very reminiscent of Justin Jefferson and some of these other guys like a Jarvis Landry and Odell. So it was a good game. I think where the frustration comes in is people are so focused on the last couple seasons, and you hired Brian Kelly. You paid the buyout from Notre Dame because you are expecting someone to build on top of what Ed Orgeron was able to do. Brian Kelly is a better coach than Ed Orgeron. Ed Orgeron was able to get a championship. The expectations are just significantly higher, and I think they're justifiably so because of the money you spent, because of the prestige of the program, because of the expectations. And so while, again, their goals are still intact, having that first loss, it hurts more because the game felt winnable. You felt like you were the better team and they just couldn't close it out at the end. And so I personally think some of the flack on Brian Kelly is justified. I don't call for people to come out of coach, but the assignment for LSU with hiring him was to win championships. Like, you're not hiring him to win the SEC West 2 years ago. Like, you're hiring him to make the playoffs and win championships. And so you got to be able to close out games, and that's where they missed here.
Yeah, and you got to look at coaching. You got to be happy about the defense. They got pressure on Miller Moss. He was just not susceptible to that pressure. Like, he played through the pressure, 14 yards per pass. So the defense was doing what it needed to do. USC just kind of played through it a little bit. And, their LSU fans know about this 0-1 start, and they know that it doesn't mean the end of a season. And even less so this year, where you're playing for a playoff spot as opposed to having to win the SEC or having to go undefeated to make it. So we'll see some game plan tweaks next week against Nichols, getting a little bit, maybe some better DB play and working on some of the schemes there. But LSU is not done. They're not out. Neutral site game. They're, after a trip out to Vegas, it's a tough place to play.
Yeah. And props to LSU. I mean, maybe it's their AD or the players deciding it, but like them and Georgia are always, one or two teams that pick these week one big time games. Like major respect, because it's so much easier just to schedule a school like, Old Dominion, and you pay them $2 million. And the idea is you just whip up on them. But these are games that, put butts in seats. I mean, you saw Las Vegas was 75% Tigers. No surprise, but really, really entertaining. It was the only game on that night, so all eyes were on it. I think it had 9.2 million viewers, one of the most in the weekend. So I had a good time watching it. Would love to see the Tigers pull it off. And I'm still really excited for what the Bayou Bengals have coming here for the rest of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. No, week one at a glance, win or loss, there's a lot of excitement around every team. There's no team that I'm looking at and I'm like, ooh, there's something to look at for each team and say what they can improve on. We can see the schedule. We mentioned the out of conference games. They get the 2 byes this year. There's room to improve upon it. There's rooms to improve even upon the successes. And, I was excited to recap this and talk about the games. I had so many thoughts, so it was good to go through. And, yeah, looking forward. I mean, there's a lot of good games next week that we're going to be highlighting in the next episode.
Definitely. I was just like you. I was really excited. I mean, I've been having fun doing this with the preview and the week one preview, but it's so different when they put the pads on and they lace up the cleats and you get to see some real deal football, and a lot to be excited about. I mean, 13-3 overall against other conferences, and love to see all 16 kind of get a dub and do their thing, each and every week, as long as they're playing out of conference teams. And so we're excited for our 4th episode to come out for you and our fans here and our listeners. We're going to be, covering the week 2 games. We got some, our new SEC podcast game of the week again. So I think we landed pretty good for the one we picked for week 1. And I think the fans should be really excited for who we have for week 2, and should be a lot of good ball to talk about. So like, follow, subscribe on Instagram as well as YouTube, and we'll be back.
Absolutely. Let us know what you want to hear, and and thank you for listening. We'll catch you in the next one.